Happy Valentine's Day, and welcome back to Gator Talk in the first video version of the podcast. I'm Sunthi Jong, co-copy editor for GGX. Today's episode centers on The Safe Place, a confidential counseling service for victims of gender-based violence. We'll talk about how to navigate relationships and discuss toxic behaviors, as well as identify resources for those in need. Joining us today will be Noor Loren, the manager and main counselor for The Safe Place. Let's get started. Happy listening. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Noor. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks for having me here.
Of course, of course. So we're just going to get right into it. If you could really briefly discuss your educational background and some of the work that you did prior to joining SF State, that'd be great.
For sure. So I have a bachelor's in sociology and ethnic studies, and women and gender studies, and then I got my master's in social work. And so part of the work that I was doing beforehand was about around clinical counseling and then supporting survivors of gender-based violence in more like community and organizations and like nonprofits. So I have more of that background.
Okay, for sure. And so you moved out from the Midwest to the Bay Area to continue that work, am I right?
Correct.
Yeah, so why SF State? Like, what drew you to the campus?
For sure. First and foremost, like definitely that the first college of ethnic studies was here was definitely a draw. But as I was doing research around San Francisco State, like that, the student activism part of it really drew me in. I think it's like great how the students here have such like a voice on campus and are able to go through processes to get their needs met institutionally.
Yeah, for sure. So you had mentioned when we spoke that the work that you're doing at the Safe Place is a little bit different in terms of like how you structure the program and like how you cater to a different demographic. If you could talk really briefly about the difference between, you know, the work that you were doing versus the work that you're doing in an academic setting on a college campus, like what are some of the differences between that? How do you approach it?
Sure. So a lot of the work in the nonprofit community organizing space was with adults, like 30s, 40s, 50s plus. And while that work was definitely like rewarding, I think like what drew me into working in an institution of like higher education like San Francisco State was the ability to work with like younger adults, freshly entering their adulthood. And my reasoning for that is because like I am specifically drawn to thinking of ways and like figuring out how to end gender-based violence on campuses, but collectively within like our society. And I think like the best way to implement those interventions are with adults freshly entering their adulthood, so like that 18 to 22 age where developmentally like you're still growing, right, and like becoming the full person that you are. So
you're marinating.
Yeah, for sure. It's coming together, but yes, I think that late teens, early 20s is such a pivotal time in people's lives, and
right.
So one of the best times to try to create systemic and long-lasting change.
And I think that does get into kind of what the heart of today's talk is supposed to be about, which is really this idea that for some of our listeners, you know, they're new to a university setting for sure. They're new to adulthood and the sense of independence that can come along with that. Many of them are in their first or one of their first committed, like real adult relationships. And it's an exciting time, but there are definitely a lot of pitfalls associated with that as well. I think we can, you know, inadvertently find ourselves in a lot of situations that we never anticipated. And I really like that idea that this is really the time to be addressing that and figuring out how to navigate these relationships in a healthy way, in a safe way, in a safe place.
Mm-hmm.
So for people who don't know already, people who are just hearing about it for the first time, what is the Safe Place? You know, what's its history at the university? What services specifically do you actually provide there?
For sure. The Safe Place is the only confidential space on campus, and so that's really important for students to be aware of in case like any situation, but specifically around gender-based violence, so including like sexual assault and harassment, intimate and domestic partner violence, stalking, like around those experiences, I am able to like support students in like crisis counseling, advocate for them, navigating whatever it is that they need to, seek out for their healing process. So whether that's, deciding to report to Title IX or University Police or SFPD or whatever the case may be, or providing them resources and referrals too is a big part of my job. And so let's look at like, what are the next steps for you in terms of like your healing. And so referring them to SF General for forensic exams, or referring them to like community organizations to get like additional support, or on-campus organizations, or whatever the case is. I think of like the safe place in the work that I do as like being that bridge or the initial like stepping stone for like their long-lasting healing by connecting them to the things that they need for like first and foremost their well-being, like their emotional and psychological well-being, and safety is like the most important aspects, but then also like their success as students.
So you mentioned that the Safe Place is the only confidential space on campus for people going through these situations. Has it remained so since its establishment? Like, when was the Safe Place established?
Sure.
Do you know?
So Safe Place came on SFSU's campus in 1992. So it's about 32 years that the Safe Place has been around. And since its inception, it's always been a space for students to have access to a non-mandated reporter, which is important because everyone on campus is a mandated reporter, and so you can feel supported by your faculty, your peers, or whatever the case is. But at the end of the day, like if you don't want to go through institutional systems, right? The Safe Place is there, and so I think like it really came about wanting to have a more trauma-informed approach to supporting college students who are survivors. And so yeah, I don't push any initial healing's not a one-stop shop. Like there's not one pathway to like what someone's journey is, and so I think like what's most important is like understanding for that particular person what it is that they feel like is restorative, and figuring out the pathways to get them access to the.
Right. And you had mentioned that there's a lot of outside resources that you collaborate with as well. What are some of the outdoor resources if people want to take like the non-campus affiliated route, right? Like what are some of these other community organizations that they can gain access to?
For sure. So we have a really great partnership with SF and that's the one that I typically refer students to just because like they're local and they're just a really great organization overall. But there's BayWar, which is like the sister program to SF there is La Casa de las Madres, Asian Women's Shelter, QAV, which stands for like Communities United Against Violence, which is more supportive for LGBTQI plus folks, but although like the names of these like spaces are very gendered, they are open to all folks who experience gender-based violence because it's not just cisgender women who are impacted by this. And so yeah, that's just a resource that whoever is a survivor is able to access.
And the last time we spoke, you had mentioned that you're new to the management position for the Safe Place. You joined in August, right? Yeah, so are you doing anything to really like change the structure of the program to expand upon it or maybe improve what's already there?
For sure. So since the Safe Place has been on campus, so the last like 30 plus years, there's only been one advocate on campus, which is not sustainable. I think in order to effectively support all students and really do some of the like prevention education work that I think it's like necessary and part of the job. And so we are expanding, which is like super exciting. So we are in the process of hiring a second advocate, which is like very exciting. And then we are looking at like the process of Safe Place and like how we can foster more collaboration with different student organizations and clubs on campus and just like different affinity groups in order to like get the word out there. I think first and foremost, like that's the most important thing still, but then to like do some programming and workshops and trainings and to just think more about like how the Safe Place can not only support students but really be a vehicle and part of this like mission to end violence on campus.
So my question to you is, the people who have been in your office and, you've helped them start this journey of like reclaiming themselves and healing from whatever situation they've been through, what are some of the common issues that are presented to you when people are in your office and they're talking to you? In the SF State community, what do people seem to be struggling with in their relationships?
Sure, and I think it goes back to the point that you mentioned earlier, where it's like this is oftentimes like people's first relationships or one of the first moments in their lives that they're experiencing, deeper, more adult situations. And so outside of like some experiences that, folks are like seeking support for that happen like off campus or on campus, like in terms of relationships specifically, some of the things that's like mentioned is like, oh, my partner isn't like respecting my boundaries, and like how do I have this conversation around like these things are not feeling good to me, but I do want to continue a relationship with them, or oh, this person's like gaslighting me, or they're speaking to me in ways that like are triggering or don't feel good, right? And like how do I have that communication and like I don't want to be addressed like this, like please, and so it's just like really having conversations around like what does that skill set look like, and recognizing like if a relationship is not feeling good, like listen to that intuition, and then if it's not serving you, what are appropriate ways of like ending that. And so I'm also available to like support students and like figuring that out too, like let's talk about it, right? And so yeah, I think like overall the Safe Place is just one of the many resources that are available to students, and like getting them support around like what is a healthy relationship, what's not healthy, and like where do you want to go from there, right? I'm not in the business of telling people how to live, right? But I just want to support them and thriving and whatever it is that they want to do.
Right. I like that you called it a skill set, because that's really what it is, isn't it? Like when it comes to relationships, whether it's platonic or romantic, like we do not intuitively know these things. We don't intuitively know how to do that. And so I really, calling it a skill set, it really centers that idea that this is a learned, like, lack of education, would you say? Is that what you're combating here?
I think that's a big part of it, for sure. Unfortunately, like our K through 12 education does not prepare students to have these conversations, to engage in these relationships in ways that are healthy. And so, yeah, I think when students come to college, right, it leads to a multitude of like growing pains, and that doesn't invalidate just like behaviors that are objectively
bad.
Yeah. And so there's that, but yeah, I think a lot of it is just like general lack of like social skills and like the growing pains of like acquiring those skills. And so I think through education, that's a big way of like implementing or ensuring that like modeling is the word I'm looking for. Mm-hmm. Modeling those behaviors that are healthy, right? And like healthy ways to engage in whatever type of relationship, whether it is romantic, platonic, something in between,
Right.
And yeah, how to do that in a way that like all parties feel good, and then it ends, like how do we end this too? Because that's also important to like talk about.
Right. You heard her, guys. This is the time while your brain is still marinating, before your flaws become your personality. So for students who are scared to find themselves in your office, because you are who they will be speaking to, people who, whatever reason, if it's like this internalized shame, if it's just, oh, I didn't know I was supposed to be talking to someone about that. Like, people who are scared or hesitant or unwilling in any way to get themselves into your office, you know, they're being held back or holding themselves back. What would you say to get them to approach you?
For sure. First and foremost, like, I'm a very survivor-centered, person-centered person overall, and practitioner of the work that I do. And so I'm never going to do anything that the student says that they're not comfortable or don't want to. I myself, and I think, like, since the Safe Place is open, all the different other advocates that preceded me have always been trauma informed, and use a trauma informed approach to the work. And yeah, I think, like, what I would want to express with, like, all students is that, like, you know, I am here to, like, support them in whatever process that looks like, and I'm also the only confidential space on campus. And so if you don't feel comfortable, like, going to someone who would have to report, but you are looking for a little additional support in ways that, like, your friends may not be adept or equipped to support you with, like, definitely feel free to just reach out and, like, let's have a conversation. You know, and I'm more than happy to provide the resources that I can. And if I don't know the answer, I'm not gonna, like, pretend that I do, right? But I will do my best to connect them with the person or people or resource or whatever it is that is needed. So, you know, to facilitate, you know, the healing that's happening. Because, you know, at the end of the day, I just want all students to, like, be great, graduate, live their best lives.
Graduate, you guys, we can do it.
Yes.
It's the spring semester. I know we've got people in the graduating class listening. Almost there.
Almost there.
Almost to the
Finish line
finish
is
line.
so close.
Oh my God, will we make it? Who knows?
You're gonna make it.
Thank you, I appreciate it. So thank you so much, Noor, for coming on today. It was a pleasure to speak with you as always. For our listeners, this was Noor Loren, the manager of the Safe Place. If you or someone you know is in need of resources offered by the Safe Place, if you need someone to talk to, you can find Noor in the Student Services Building, room 403. You can phone in at 415-694-3825, or you can email at safeplace@sfsu.edu. Again, this was Noor Loren with The Safe Place. Thank you so much for coming on today. It was lovely to speak with you. Happy Valentine's Day to all of our Gators listening. This has been Sunthi Jong with Golden Gate Express on Gator Talks. Thank you again.